had last week. So that's the most snow I think we've had in one 24-hour period since I've moved up here. So that was quite a bit of snow. Different areas got different amounts. So we got like 10 inches, somewhere between 10 and 11 inches at our house. We measure it. I got drifts on the back of my deck that are all halfway up my sliding glass doors. We got a ton of snow. We had about 5 or 6 inches, and then Sunday afternoon around 2 o'clock, we got about 2.5, 3 inches more in about 2 hours. It just snowed, and it wasn't everywhere. When we headed to Kokomo, they had less snow than we did. So there was like a band of snow that went through that dumped about 2.5 extra inches there in about a 2-hour period. It was crazy. We were back in the back, and we didn't even know it was snowing that hard. We were back in the back doing some stuff on the computer, and we came back in the front room. We're like, when did that happen? So it went from like there to there on the back door. I'm like, whoo. So, yeah, it was crazy. February 1st, after the AM service, we had to move our children's worship workers meeting from last week to February 1st. So if you're a teacher or a worker in the children's worship, stay after service this coming Sunday, and we'll go through a few things that we need to go through. No seniors breakfast tomorrow. Just an issue that Tina was going to have with people working and also with getting the food. Because guess what? Everybody did a run on the grocery stores, and you can only buy certain amounts. And I think it kindly freed up now, but we had to make a decision on Monday, and we didn't have the egg stuff that we use or the biscuits and gravy stuff that we get. So no seniors breakfast until February now. So February. Huh? Yep, February will be the next seniors breakfast. None tomorrow. So combination of things. Trouble getting the quantities of food we usually get from where we get it. And also then it's going to be really cold in the morning because we didn't know how many people would want to get out early in the morning with it being really cold anyway. So, and I know the workers have to be here at like 6:30 or 7 to start cooking breakfast. So, yeah. So Tina asked if we could cancel it, and I said, sure, that would be fine. I understood. So we'll start again at the end of February. So February 1st in the Sunday evening service, weather permitting, we're going to start an Old Testament survey. So if you've never done one, I think you'll enjoy it and you'll learn a lot. We just kind of go through and put everything in sequential order and kind of identify how the different books of the Old Testament kind of function together. And then we look at all the major events as we do that. So it's not something where we're not studying the Bible. We're actually going to study major events, but we're just going to put them in a certain chronological order. We also get into some of the big themes of the Old Testament. I think that's really helpful. So we'll be doing that starting February 1st, and that will probably run all the way into summer. February 8th is our next fellowship meal and new member orientation. And February 15th, after the morning service, we'll have a short meeting for Redemption Road where we share where we are and talk about what comes next. And don't forget to check Facebook for Snow in Church. So when we make a decision to cancel, we not only send out the messaging system, but we also post it on Facebook, and so you can always check there. I think Instagram also gets updated. And then if Nick's not working, if he's at home, he updates the web page. So you'll be more likely to find it on Facebook and Instagram if it's a weekend. If it's during the week, he'll get on the web page as well. But I just check Facebook and Instagram if you have those, so you can get that information as quick as possible. So today, I wasn't sure how many people would come. I kind of had a feeling we'd be a little low because it's cold. The parking lot is clear, but the roads are not. I don't know if you've noticed that. If you get off of the main roads, the roads are pretty much just solid ice still. So we came in and we skipped all the county roads coming in because they could look down them and see they were just solid sheets of ice. And then we thought, well, we'll come on into town and we'll turn on to Miller because I'm thinking, well, surely Miller will be clear, right? It runs in front of the school. Most places clear the roads in front of their schools. That is a top priority. No. Miller is just, from the time you turn left at the credit union till you get here, it's just one solid skating rink. I could have put on ice skates and got here quicker than I could drive here down that road. So it's just like that thick too. I mean, looking at it, it's not thin, it's thick and it's packed. So be careful out there on the side roads because they are still pretty slick. So we're going to study something different this morning just because when I do sequences, I hate to keep going and have half the people not here. So we're just going to study a psalm. We're going to study Psalm 4. So when I do these, I usually pick some of my favorites. So because I always have extra sermons in the Psalms for things like this, for emergencies and things. And it helps me because I enjoy studying the Psalms. I have my favorites, and so those are the ones I tend to do outlines for anyway. I was actually going to use this on Sunday night, so we just use it today. And then next week we'll get started back with our regular Bible study. Psalms 4:1, answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have relieved me in my distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayers. So the backstory of Psalm 4, like many of the Psalms, David is besieged with suffering, injustice, and oppression. So David's being treated poorly. He's done some things, as we know, if we study the life of David. He was not perfect, but he was a man after God's own heart. And yet, sometimes his sinful actions caused him to suffer, and other times his righteous actions caused him to suffer. We notice in verse 4 that as he's basically pouring his heart out to God about his suffering and the injustice he's facing and the oppression he's experiencing, also exhibits the changing attitudes of the worshiper in his most difficult circumstances. So one of the things you'll see in this is how David is able, much like Job, to worship in severe difficulty and then also transition out of severe difficulty into a more tranquil and peaceful time in his life and continue to worship as well. That's one of the amazing things about David and like Job, especially love reading the book of Job, that Job is able to worship in the midst of the most profound suffering and sorrow imaginable. He loses all of his children, his wife turns against him, his own friends begin to persecute him and accuse him of all kinds of things that he's actually not guilty of, and trying to make him, I don't know, have you ever read the book of Job and wondered, why did his friends even bother to come visit? I ask that question a lot. Just stay home, right? I mean, if you're just coming to slam the poor guy, just stay home. You don't know what's going on in his life. You don't know what the thoughts of his mind and the attitude of his heart is. You don't have any sinful actions you can actually accuse him of. So here this guy is, he's lost everything, and you just come over to basically claim that the reason he lost everything was because he's obviously committed some sort of sin that he's hidden from everybody but God. Now he's being punished for it. And we know from the first chapter that's absolutely untrue. He got caught in basically an argument between the Lord and the devil. That's what caused his suffering. And so David experienced this. And I think you see this in not just David and Job, but you also see this in others, where you see this tendency, even amongst God's people, to claim that every time somebody suffers who's a person of faith, they're suffering because of some sort of hidden sin. So he's experienced the persecution that comes from that. Also the sense of despair and discouragement. So as we kind of get into this, you see this then as he pours out his heart. And that's why I like the Psalms. The Spirit of God clearly moves him to just pour out his heart, to talk to us as a man of faith and deal with the different situations and circumstances that come up in life. So some, we see the Psalms as just high forms of praise and worship where David is celebrating the goodness of God. The fact that his life lived in God's will is great. And then we see other times where things are not so great and he's suffering, and yet he continues to worship and he continues to look to God for answers. So this is designed, according to commentary writers, as an evening prayer that they used to sing to stringed instruments. So a stringed instrument would be something like, for them, a harp or a lyre. And they would actually sing this, and it was done in the evening time. So it's sort of an evening prayer that was sung. They were praying to God for preservation, much like David did. So David wrote this out of his own life experiences as the Spirit of God moved him. When it was added to the Psalter, the people took it as the inspired words that it was, and they used it as a song that they would sing in the evening time. Oftentimes when things were not good, when they were suffering or struggling, and this could be a nationwide type thing where the entire nation would sing this in the evening time, or it could be an individual household or even an individual person. This was something that they knew. They were taught this from childhood. Most of the Hebrew people understood and knew most of the Psalms by heart. They could sing them, they could recite them, they could go back through them in their own mind. And so this is a song they would sing from memory, and probably having sung it hundreds, if not thousands of times before, if they were of any age. And they're praying in this song to God for preservation, just like David did. And they're also praying for a couple things in that preservation. We'll kind of break those down. So he talks out, he says, answer me when I call. So the first thing that he's seeking is an answer from God. During this difficult time, he's been crying out and he's waiting on God to answer him. And he's hinging his patience and his continued trust that God will answer on God's righteousness. That God is a righteous God and that God is the God of his individual righteousness. So David is basically saying, I believe that you're righteous because I have built my life around you and your ways. And so I'm going to trust you and I'm going to continue to call out, but I am waiting for an answer. Please answer me. And I know that you will because you are a righteous God. And that's another way of saying that you are a good God. David's also recounting in this that you are the model that I have built my life around. So I'm waiting on you, and I believe you're going to answer because you are a good God. And I want you to know that I have tried, and I know I have failed, but I have tried, and I'm continuing to try to build my life around you. I want to live the way you want me to live. I want to be like you. That's what he's getting at. And he understands this. He understands that God's intention for him was to obey the law, which was a reflection of God's very nature. And so David wants to follow that law, and yet at times he has transgressed the law, many times probably at this point, but he is a person who truly wants to be righteous as God is. And so he follows the example of Scripture that God has given to him, and yet in the midst of this, he's really struggling. Life has gotten hard, and he's not sure why, and he's really just, I wouldn't say he's in despair at this point, but he does use the word distress. You have relieved me in my distress. So he knows that in the past, God has relieved him when he's been in a moment of distress. I'd say he's in a moment of distress again. Again, he closes it, the first verse, with be gracious to me and hear my prayer. So again, he's asking for an answer and he's asking for God to hear. So twofold, two things. And he believes that God will hear him and that God will then answer him, because God is a good and righteous God, number one. And number two, God has done so in the past. So when he's been in distress in the past, he has cried out to God, and God has heard his cry, and God has answered that cry and relieved his distress. And he wants God to do it again. Now, this is a common experience, I believe, for all of us. When things get hard, we do exactly what we should, and we faithfully begin to pray. Would you agree with that? When life gets hard, we do what we should, and we faithfully begin to pray. And one of the things we're praying for, besides deliverance and help, which we do, and I think it's right to pray for deliverance and help, and I also think it's right to pray for God to answer. Because one of the biggest issues we have when we're suffering is confusion. I think we all get a little confused when we're really hurting. We get a little confused as to, number one, same reason Job got confused, same reason David gets confused. Why? So why is God either causing this or allowing it? Because if we do believe in God's sovereignty, and the entire Bible teaches us that God is sovereign over all that he's created, right? Which means he has complete and total reign over all he's created. Why does he allow and why does he cause? And that's something David really is struggling with. So why is this the way it is? And I think all of us do. And it's okay to pray that. In fact, I think it's exactly what we should pray when we're confused. Because if we don't go to God to help us get rid of the confusion, we're going to go to someone or something else. Because none of us like living in a state of confusion. We all want clarity. We all want to understand. And we may not ever, but if we go to God, God will at least give us peace with what we're not able to fully understand yet. I think one day we will, but we might not yet. And God is alone is the one who can give us peace in that moment. And so if we don't go to God, we're going to go to someone else. And that's tragic if you think about it. How often, if we don't go to God with our confusion and cry out for an answer, how often do we go to another person? Help me with this. Every time, right? I believe you're right. I think every time. We will find someone else to talk to, won't we? And I'm not against talking to brothers and sisters in Christ, especially if they're godly men and women who love the Lord and know his word, because they might be able to speak the word into my life in that moment under the direction of the Holy Spirit that will open my eyes and give me my answer. I think God does use his people for that on a regular basis. But again, we're assuming they're going to know the word. We're assuming they are godly, and we're assuming that they are in the center of God's will in that moment. But oftentimes, even amongst brothers and sisters, what happens is we sit around and we will not want to tell people the truth, or we really don't even understand ourselves. And I will tell people that. I've had counseling sessions where at the end of the session, I had no idea what was going on. Trust me, if you've ever been in one of these situations, you'll understand someday where somebody comes to you and they want you to give them an answer, and they tell you the story, and you're so confused by the time it's over. And there's this instinct in us to not want to look like we don't understand or we don't get what's going on, and I have to fight that every time. And if I don't understand or I don't know what to tell you, I will look at you and say, I really don't know what to say. Because it's far better to say that than it is to give somebody an answer that you just pull out of your head somewhere and say, well, I got to say something, so I'm going to say this. Because then you run the chance of being like Job's friends. You run the risk of actually piling on because you don't fully understand what's going on here. So I will tell people, we need to pray about this because I don't understand either, but I know who does, right? That's the one we need to talk to about this. It's okay if somebody comes to you and pours out their heart. If you really don't know what to say, be honest. Say, I really don't know what to say about this. I really feel bad for you. I'm going to pray for you, but you're going to have to get your answer from God for this situation. I mean, people come to me and some things it's just easy, right? Somebody comes to you and they say, hey, I stole some money from work. What should I do? I feel awful about it. Okay, that's easy, right? That's an easy answer. Number one, take the money back. Well, number one, ask God to forgive you for what you've done. Number two, take the money back and ask for forgiveness. If they won't forgive you, then you're going to have to take your lumps. That's going to be the consequence of your sin, but you need to make this right. And I could quote tons of verses about that, right? Making restitution, doing what's right, restoring unto those. And I could go through the Levitical law and talk about restoration when you've taken something. That's easy. I could do that. But you get into some of these dynamics like in marital relationships and people in their families, people with issues with other people, and you see the right and wrong on both sides, and you kind of point that out, and you can do that. You can point out the right and wrong biblically. And then people are like, well, how do we fix this? It's like, okay, I give you some basic general biblical principles, and then after that, you're going to have to pray and ask God to help you to find a way forward, because I can only go so far. And that's the problem, isn't it? With other people, other people can only go so far. But I also warn you about this. Most people are not going to look at you and say what I say. I don't know, you need to pray about it. Most of them are going to look at you and say, you're right, and here's what you need to go do. And you know what happens then? You ever hear the story of the blind leading the blind? Yeah, when the blind leads the blind down the road, they both wind up eventually where? In the ditch. And that's the problem. So David's doing exactly what he should be doing. And I've heard Christians say, well, I shouldn't complain. You're not really complaining when you cry out to God for an answer. You're just confused. Keep the right attitude. It's not a complaint. I'm just confused. And I need some clarification. It's okay to ask God to do it quickly, especially if you're really confused and you're afraid it's going to affect you in some way that's detrimental to your spiritual walk. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people. Their spiritual walk begins to diminish because they won't ask God to help them understand. Verse 2, O sons of men, how long will my honor become a reproach? All right, so we start to get into what his specific problem is here. And most of the Psalms, by the way, talk about general application like crying out to God for answers and asking God why he hasn't delivered yet. And then most of them also get into some of the details of where the individual psalmist is. And David, by the way, is not the only one who writes these kinds of psalms. Asaph writes some of these as well. So you get into what's going on in their life that has caused, in this particular case, David to be so confused. Why is he in so much sorrow? Why is he feeling so much pain? And why is he so confused about what's going on? So verse 2, O sons of men, how long will my honor become a reproach? How long will you love what is worthless and aim at deception? So we begin to see what is causing David's distress. And guess what is causing David's distress? People. People. I'm telling you honestly, it's people that's causing David's distress. Because he tells us right out of the gate, sons of men. And what are sons of men? People. And he says, how long? How long is this going to go on? How long will my honor become a reproach? So we know that his character is being attacked. We don't know exactly why in this particular psalm. But as I said earlier, in David's life, there were two causes of oppression, persecution, and people attacking him. One was his sin, right? And that was a consequence of his sin. Number two was when he did the right things. A lot of people overlook this, but it's right there in the black and white in the Old Testament. If you read it closely, David was what we would call the first real reformer. So when Saul became king, idol worship was common in Israel. Now, Saul didn't really care, but Samuel did, if you recall. People weren't afraid of Saul, they were afraid of Samuel. And Saul loved Samuel and trusted him and gave Samuel free rein. So Samuel started cracking down on idol worship. He started cracking down on the temples, and he started cracking down on those who actually led the worship of idols. But it continued. David became king, and he cracked down on idolatry. And that's when things really started to roll, because he had more power than Samuel ever had. So David really starts to get rid of idol worship in Israel. And he was attacked for that. People didn't like it because they loved their idols for whatever reason. And I don't get it. I really don't get it in Israel. God was really good to them. As David as king, they had victory after victory after victory. And God gave them those victories. It wasn't because Israel was a more powerful nation or had a better military. They weren't. God just gave them victories because David was a faithful follower of God, and he was leading the people to faithfully follow God. But at the same time, it's like he's dragging them along his whole life, and they're pulling back. And so he's attacked for one of those two reasons, either the things that he was doing that were right or some of the sins that he committed. And because, though, of the animosity that built up among the people when he was leading them in the right direction, as soon as he slipped up, the assault on him was more severe than it would have been otherwise. What I find fascinating is these same idol worshipers who attack him after Bathsheba were doing 10 times worse in their idol worship practices. But man, as soon as David slips up, because he's been leading them in the right direction, they come after him. So in verse 2, O sons of men, how long will my honor become a reproach? You can hear that this is something that maybe is related to his sin, and he realized he deserved some of it. But the question now is, how long is this going to continue? Because he keeps saying, how long? The second is, how long will you love what is worthless and aim at deception? So his character is being attacked, and he asks, well, how long is this going to continue? And he's not really asking people. Again, he's crying out to God. And he really wants to know is, how long are these people going to continue to attack my honor, to attack my integrity? And then the second thing is, how long are they going to continue to love what is worthless and aim at deception? So the two schools of thought on verse 2 is, as I said, one, it's related to his sin, but I tend to lean more towards 2, which is this is related to when he was actually cleaning out the idols. Because, again, you see the sorrow, you see the confusion, and probably a little bit of anger mixed in. He really doesn't understand why people are attacking him for doing what's right. He doesn't get it. Doesn't get it at all. I mean, if you've ever been attacked for doing what's right, there will be at least some moments in your life and in your mind you're going to be thinking, why? Why is this a bad thing? I think people have run into that more in recent years too, by the way, saying things that were just common sense and normal, such as men cannot go to women's bathrooms. Why are people attacking me for saying that men shouldn't be allowed in women's bathrooms? Shouldn't women say, thank you for protecting us? I've had that confusion a few times, right? Because it's the women that will attack you for saying men can't go into their bathrooms. Well, you know what kind of man wants to come into your bathroom? I would think you would thank me for blocking him from coming into the bathroom with you. But instead, you're angry with me. And I'm like, why are you mad? I mean, why, ladies, why does the other ladies get mad when a man says, hey, dude, you cannot go in the bathroom with my daughter? You're probably right. I don't know where they're going. But, that's very possible. I don't know. But it's just, I don't get it. You know, so that's where the confusion comes in. So you're doing what's right, and people attack you for it, and there's going to be confusion because you're thinking, well, that's right. Why is doing right wrong? But then you think of passages like Romans 1, and don't think that Paul wasn't carrying the same mindset that David was as the Spirit of God moved him to write. When he says at the end of Romans 1, they call good evil and evil good. That's confusing to anybody who's born again, filled with the Holy Spirit, striving to live a righteous life. Why in the world? How in the world can you think that's good when that in fact is evil and even hurts you? I have watched people champion things that are wrong that hurts them more than anyone else. A lot of these things people champion, I'm not really affected by because I keep it away from my home. But those are the people who it is affecting them directly. And I don't get it. And that's what he's pouring out here, because when he talks about how long will you love what is worthless and name it deception, again, that's more of a question for God. Why is this continuing the way it is? Why do people continue to love what is absolutely worthless, and why are they aiming at things that are deceptive? So why are they championing these things? Why are they championing things and infatuated with things that are worthless and deceitful? And he doesn't understand. So again, you see the confusion, and that's where the confusion is coming from. Verse 3, but know that the Lord has set apart the godly man for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. So this is where it kind of transitions. So you can see why this would be a fantastic evening prayer if you're struggling. He's basically pouring out his struggle, asking for answers, asking for understanding, asking God to help him to see a way forward. And then in verse 3, but I know this, he says, that even though I'm confused, even though I don't understand, and even though I don't like what's going on, I know that the Lord has set apart the godly man for himself. So he said, I know who has set me aside to serve him, and that is God. So the Lord hears when I call to him. So even though he hasn't gotten his answer yet, at least not the complete answer he's looking for, he knows without any doubt that God has heard his cry. Verse 4 and 5, we'll do those together. Tremble and do not sin. So again, as I'm waiting for an answer, as I'm struggling, even if I'm trembling because I'm afraid, or then that confusion and stress is beginning to mount, I'm not going to sin in that. Meditate in your heart upon your bed and be still. Now, these are words that you would sing because they would influence you. These are things that you would recite that would influence your heart and mind to keep you on the straight and narrow path when you're maybe being tempted to stray off. This is when you start to think, is it really worth it to live righteously and to do the right things and follow God and then get treated this way? Is it really worth it? Well, this is a song you need to sing when that thought begins to pop up in your head. Tremble and do not sin. Meditate in your heart upon your bed and be still. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and trust in the Lord. So offer the sacrifices of righteousness. Now, sacrifice of righteousness is something that's often overlooked because we all get fixated on the sacrifices of animals. But the real sacrifice God was always looking for was the sacrifice of the heart, where a person would humble themselves before him, put their sinful and selfish desires aside, and seek to follow him. That's why Jesus' invitation is what? Come, follow me. Same invitation God gave to the children of Israel. You can choose life, and you know how you choose life? By following me. You can refuse to follow me, and that is you choosing death. There is no middle ground. You either choose life or you choose death. You either follow me or you don't. And so what God is looking for is a people who will follow him and obey him. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and trust in the Lord. So David, again, reminding himself that he needs to live wisely and he needs to continue to offer his life up as a living sacrifice to God, even if he does not understand what is going on around him. Because this is about internal. I may never, and probably never will anymore, because I'm a long ways from when I got saved. I'm a long ways from being lost. I don't think that way anymore. I may never again in my life, and probably never will again in my life, really understand how other people think. I don't think that's a bad thing. What I do care about is not so much what goes on around me, but what goes on in here. If I could be honest with you, I really have learned a really profound ability. It's called turning everything and everybody else off. If you've learned that, you've learned the trick of living life for Christ in a fallen world. There are times you just got to turn everybody else off and just ignore the voices and ignore the talk and ignore what people say. Just turn it off and focus in on here and what do you think? And I can't stress how important this is. This is David's way of saying, I've learned there's some things I have to do and I can turn it off and I can focus in on where I am in this moment. And I can talk to God honestly and openly, because even though my relationship with God is not perfect, it's really good. It's really good. And I know that I can be honest with him. There isn't anything I think he doesn't already know anyway. And so David is just a person who can turn it off in that moment, pour his heart out to God, and examine himself. Most people can't do that, I've found. I couldn't do it for years. Most people cannot turn off the noise, really pour out their heart to God, and then figure out, with his help, where they're at in that moment. And that's why most people just continue to drift along on the waves. They just continue to flounder around in life because they never really learn how to draw near to God, because that's what that is. Turning it all off, pouring your heart out to God, and examining yourself is what drawing near to God is. You can't do it any other way. And so he recognizes this, and he begins to, in these verses, show us how he actually deals with it all. How do you deal with all this noise? How do you deal with this confusion? How do you wait on God to actually answer in a fuller way? How do you do that? Well, you have to pause, pour your heart out to God, stop listening to all the voices and all the chatter, and then examine yourself as God leads you and directs you. And then rededicate yourself every day to living your life as a sacrifice to him. Verse 6, many are saying, who will show us any good? Lift up the light of your countenance. I know exactly who's going to help me. God's going to help me. Are we living in a doom and gloom age? Sort of. It depends on where you are in your own heart. I have found that not much else in life matters. Pretty much where I am in my heart with the Lord is pretty much the one thing that matters. Circumstances change. Things are up and down. Things can be really good. Things can be really bad. But if I'm where I need to be with Christ, none of that really affects internal. Other than, you will feel profound sorrow. You will, and that's not a bad thing. Profound sorrow at times will help shape and make your relationship with Christ even fuller than it was before, if you let the Spirit of God work in you. But I have learned that the key part is where I am spiritually. Things can be going really well, and if I get caught up in the things and my relationship with Christ begins to diminish, inside I will be a mess and life will not be good no matter what. No matter how good it is on the outside, it will not be good on the inside. And if it's not good on the inside, it's really not good at all. Because what he says in verse 7, I think is very important. You, and he's referencing God, have put gladness in my heart. So here's what he says. Okay, so I poured my heart out to God. I rededicated myself to following him. I'm going to continue to live righteously. I'm going to continue to follow him. I don't understand why people are mad at me for doing that. I don't understand how long they're going to attack my character. I don't understand how long they're going to spread lies about me and pursue evil things. I don't know. God hasn't given me any answer. But here's what I do know. When I poured my heart out to God, when I rededicated myself to continue to be faithful and follow him and live righteously as he's commanded me to live, he put gladness in my heart. That's what he says. More than when their grain and new wine abound. So he said, there was actually more gladness in my heart in this moment of sorrow and oppression than there even was at the end of the year when we had the tremendous harvest and we had an abundance of food and drink. I had more gladness in my heart during that time. And people say, well, how's that possible? Only in Christ. Verse 8, in peace I will both lie down and sleep. So gladness and peace are two things he has. In peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me to dwell in safety. So he has this peace in his life, peace in his heart, and he's able to go and lay his head down and go to sleep. I would tell you stuff. I know something is internally wrong when I can't sleep. Let's be honest. If I can lay my head on the pillow and sleep, we're good. I don't know about you, but God won't let me sleep if I'm not good. Am I the only one? But as long as I'm somewhere in the middle of God's will, sleep is easy because you have peace. And that's it. So verse 8 is the last verse. So just kind of going through it again. Prayer they prayed in the evening. There's a great deal of wisdom here about being close to God, what it means to draw near to Christ. how we can be confused and broken, how we can be persecuted and downtrodden and still have gladness and peace, because the gladness and peace comes from God. But usually comes from God only when we humble ourselves down and express, basically, shouldn't even say express, when we actually pour our heart out to him. God's not afraid if we're upset. He's not afraid if we're confused. He can handle it, and he knows how to lead us into the right place. The 23rd Psalm is something that people love to quote. It's probably the most well-known psalm of all, and I think it is one of the best of the psalms as far as giving peace and strength. But the 23rd Psalm, if you read it closely, is contingent on one thing. And if you don't get that one thing, it really has no meaning to you. And the one thing that the whole psalm hinges on is that the Lord is my shepherd. And what was a shepherd to the sheep? Everything. The shepherd was everything to the sheep, because the sheep wouldn't survive on their own. The sheep wouldn't be able to avoid predators or find the food and drink they needed, and so they completely depended on the shepherd. So when you're confused, if you don't look to Christ as your shepherd, if you're not willing to pour your heart out and express your shortcomings, your inability to understand, your inability to cope and deal with things in a correct way, if you're not willing to do that, then all those promises are not for you. And that's what we often overlook. All those promises are contingent on the Lord as my shepherd. And what David is doing here in Psalm 4 is showing us what that actually looks like. What does it look like when you recognize that the Lord is your shepherd? And David shows us what that. When you're confused, you go to him. You pour your heart out. When he begins to answer, but he doesn't give you the full answer, you faithfully wait. You continue to follow him, no matter where he leads, no matter how hard it gets, because you know that he is with you, that he's going to protect you, that he's going to strengthen you. And then you wait, and as you wait, he fills your heart with gladness and gives you the peace you need. You see the progression there. But again, only because he trusts the Lord. And that's who he goes to when he's confused. All right, do prayer request, and then we'll close.